Welcome back to Brick System Brothers. My name's Nathan Masters. Vintage is a word that gets thrown around every now and then in the LEGO community. Usually, of course, it's referring to older LEGO, but just how old is vintage LEGO supposed to be? The first thing I found seems to be general consensus is vintage refers to something that's 50 years old or more, but when you get about to 100 years old, it becomes an antique. So we're looking at things at least 50 years old, which means for 2021, anything before 1971. Of course, 100 years old would be 1921. LEGO wasn't even producing plastic bricks at that time, so we don't have to worry about something being older than 100 years for vintage sets. So that pretty much encompasses everything LEGO has done up to 1971. And in this video, I just wanted to take a look at what will be officially referred to as vintage this year, 2021. And so I'm asking the question, which sets were released in 1971? Brickset is very helpful when it comes to answering these kind of questions. We can break things down by sets released during a certain year, sets released within a certain theme. In this case, I'm just filtering all of the sets that were released during 1971, and it says that we have 78 total sets released. And keep in mind, 50 years is long enough that we might be missing a few here and there. This is also trying to keep track of everything Samsonite was doing, which was the distributor at the time for the US and Canada. And at a certain point, Samsonite just started making sets left and right that didn't really have counterparts in the LEGO production in Europe. So keep that in mind. We might be missing some in the records here, but Brickset, pretty thorough, pretty reliable database to pull from. So out of these 78, the first thing I wanted to ask was, kind of a general idea of the cross-section. What are some of the most prominent themes going on in LEGO production 50 years ago? Turns out we can look at three basic themes. It boils down to the LEGO Samsonite division, which was the distributor for US, like I mentioned. Now, they started doing LEGO products in 1961. And at first they were importing things from Denmark, and they were actually releasing sets that were pretty similar to whatever Denmark was doing, or whatever was going on in Europe. Sometimes they'd have different numbers, but you could at least look at the different product lines and see, all right, well, this one kind of corresponds to this set over here. It's police car, police car. In 1965, they started producing their own pieces in Colorado. And by 1971, their product line was pretty much independent from LEGO. And looking at the graph I've got going here, you can actually see in 1972, they stopped doing the contract for distribution in the US, but until 1988, they were still distributing in Canada. So yeah, it gets into the details a little bit about what actually happened in 1972, but keep in mind that this year we're looking at 1971, kind of towards the end of that Samsonite run, and we're going to look at a few specific sets that will now be considered vintage after the timeline here. The next one to look at is the Legoland theme. So the Legoland was kind of just a banner theme for a lot of different types of sets, but they did a lot of vehicles and buildings. Legoland became a theme in 1969 and ran until 1978. Legoland actually had some of the early looking minifigs with just the shoulders and no separated legs. And then in 1978, the official minifig was introduced, and Legoland moved on to become kind of different themes with town and that kind of thing. So the Legoland theme was 2 years into its run in 1971, so it was kind of picking up speed. And then the other one that is somewhat prominent was Minitalia. Minitalia is kind of a niche little thing that was going on with production in Italy. There's a little bit of confusion about Minitalia, whether it was being produced in country of Italy to avoid certain restrictive import laws. Some people say there's evidence for that. Some other people say, we can't really find anything related to that claim. So whatever the case may be, Minitalia was actually a little bit different, and that's something else that I'm going to take a closer look at, just in terms of how did Minitalia compare to the rest of the LEGO lineup at the time. That started in 1970, and it ran until 1976, but there was actually a pretty big gap between 1973, and then it kind of came back in 76, but it wasn't really the same with the branding. So officially, I think Minitalia was from 1970 to 1973, and that's kind of reflected in the set listings that you can find at different places. As far as the actual numbers that go on the breakdown, there were 35 sets by Samsonite, so that's 45%, 27 from Legoland, which is another 35%, and 5 from Minitalia, which is 6%. So kind of only a fraction of the total produced sets going into Minitalia, but I did want to mention it's kind of different from the other sub-themes in LEGO. So just looking at the theme breakdown on Brickset, we can see there was actually one book called Thinking with LEGO, a gear item called the Hold All Storage Bag. We don't have an image for that. There were a couple of Homemaker sets, so we'll look at that in a second. And then we begin the Legoland. So this is just a breakdown by theme. We can kind of look at an overview here. I am going to look at 6 or 7 individual sets that will become vintage after this year. But more of an overall look through the themes. You know, our Legoland, some buildings and vehicles. Some of these vehicles actually pretty cool looking. Wouldn't mind getting a hold of a few of these. So kind of the definition of what you'd think of when you think of vintage LEGO at this point. The kiosk here, this kiosk does have the Legoland 1x4 printed brick. That's kind of interesting. This is also the time when we get our balloon logo going on some of the other 2x2 and 1x2 printed bricks. Interesting village set here, so an early kind of concept for a town plan with those 4 wide vehicles. Oh, keep an eye on this little car right here, this yellow car with the black roof. As we keep going down, more Legoland, and we get to Minitalia. So Minitalia, just kind of more of a focus on architecture, slightly different scale of vehicles. I think it looks like Duplo, but the studs are actually hollowed on the top, so it's the same scale as a Lego brick. I've got some pulled up on eBay. We'll look at those in a second. There's actually a Minitalia train, so this wouldn't be considered in the trains theme because it was something different. And then we get to our Samsonite sets. So again, very similar just in terms of what Samsonite was doing at this point compared to LEGO. We have our 4 wide vehicles, some of them looking very close to what LEGO was putting out, but they did have a different numbering scheme. So this is actually the 10th set in the database that has number 1, the 10th set in the database that has number 2. So if you search LEGO set number 1, this will be one of 10 results. There were just a lot of overlap in these days. A lot of the other sets have 3-digit numbers in the 600 range, in the 300 range. So if you're just looking at the scheme of set numbering at this point, we're still in the 3 digits, far and away. Some early single-digit set numbers from Samsonite again. Here's an interesting 2 wide planes and that base plate that kind of has the curvy road shape going around. So this was a 32 by 32. That was kind of a standard at that point. Some of the other stuff Samsonite was putting out that is now vintage were these imagination sets. So with those old gears, those gears now moving into the vintage category. Again, we got a bunch of sets without images here just because, you know, we know they existed. There's references to them in resource materials and marketing materials, but haven't been able to get images. Well, Brickset hasn't been able to get images. That doesn't mean that people don't have pictures of these sets. That just means they haven't given Brickset permission to use them. So if you have 105-3 Samsonite set, Imagination Set 5, yeah, consider sending that on to Brickset so they could get a more complete database. Alright, getting to the end of the Samsonite, here's our little antique car kit. I just wanted to highlight this one because this is exactly the same style and model of the vehicle that I just mentioned in one of the Legoland sets. So a little 4 wide car here with the black top and the yellow body, studs not on top, kind of shoved in between the plates there for a lamp. If we go back up to the Legoland set that had the village, there it is again, the same car with the same light, red wheels, black top. So kind of interesting. Yeah, there is a little bit of overlap, but you do have to search for it a little bit. So that's kind of our Samsonite releases, and then you get into some of the larger stuff that they were doing. This would have been the equivalent of the basic bricks, what's it called today? The classic packs, the yellow boxes. It's just pieces. There's not really one or two definite sets that you're supposed to build with them. It just kind of gives you pieces to play with. So yeah, that was a thing going all the way back to the early days. In fact, some of the first things that Lego released in Denmark in the 40s and 50s were just trays of 2x4, 1x2, the slotted bricks. The original Lego, which is actually based on the original Kitty Craft from a couple of years before that. So the Lego set as a concept is actually after the brick pack. The whole idea of early Lego bricks was, you use your imagination to create what the bricks are supposed to be. And the sets were just an effective way to sell different kinds of bricks. And nowadays, the sets are far and away the most popular form for Lego to come in, but the classic creator stuff is still available. It's still getting sent to stores to sell. And I think a lot of people do prefer just to buy loose Lego pieces. You go to Lego store and they have the wall of pieces, the pick-a-brick wall. You can get stuff in bulk. So definitely still a thing, but from a marketing standpoint, I think it is making more money for Lego to sell predetermined sets that just come in a box to assemble. So that's kind of been a theme throughout Lego. A couple other minor themes at the end here were trains. There were actually two train sets in 1971. This one with the swivel crane, and this one, very similar set here. What is the difference? Plate base, train base. So the only difference between these was in this set, the black piece right here is actually a preformed element, and in this one it is built out of plates and bricks as far as I can tell. So very similar, slight difference there. So 128-2 and 128-3, the same set number even. So those were two, practically one train set released this year. And then the last couple ones are the universal building sets. We had some base plate packs. This one will give you a red and a blue. And I think these were the, what is the size here? 2, 4, 6, 8. These are the 10 by 20 if I had to guess. And these aren't so much a base plate as they are a base brick. They're a brick thick. So it doesn't come with any of these smaller bricks. It just had different colors of the base brick. So red, blue, green, yellow, and gray and white combinations were available. And those did have individual numbers. And then the other two universal building set packs were medium base plates. So these are kind of the larger ones. These are the actual thin vacuum formed plates with the rounded edge. And kind of a parts pack here for some signage, fences, and granular trees. 1971 had some gems. So that's kind of the spread of what was out and available. A total of 78 sets. And I will put this link down in the description if you want to browse this yourself. Now let's look at a few kind of up close and personal here. The 261-4 Doll's Kitchen was one of the two Homemaker sets. So Homemaker being a theme that I didn't mention in my timeline, but it kind of ran alongside these themes for a couple years. And the scale was actually quite a bit larger than what we're used to seeing with Lego pieces. Some of these cupboards that are 2x4 by 5 or 6 high are actually supposed to be lower cabinets. So this would not be anywhere close to minifig scale. This would almost be in Scala scale. And Scala was a theme that came in the 90s. So kind of predating a lot of the larger figures that were going on at the time. But definitely worth a mention and taking a look at. It was something interesting. Just a way to kind of create a model kitchen out of Lego pieces at a more realistic scale than you could with smaller stuff. This also had some of the early prints on our 2x2 tile here with the printed black circle. The oven had some printed dials, and these were either stickers or prints on the kitchen sink cabinet as well. So the Homemaker theme, kind of interesting there. The name of the set, Doll's Kitchen, actually suggests that you would build the set up to be kind of the room of a dollhouse, and then you could play with dolls that the kid already had. So you maybe bring in dolls that were already part of a toy collection and customize a kitchen for the dolls to play with. So, not necessarily targeted at boys or girls, but a very younger age thing, although it is still Lego pieces, so they're smaller. So kind of a girl's toy, young girl's toy for that in the Homemaker series. Something from the Legoland theme was the Swiss Chalet, $3.49. Did use this old antenna piece and some basic white and red pieces. Our 1x4 fence is here, our old windows are here, so the scale here is actually smaller than minifig scale, and this was the default scale for Lego buildings up until 1975-ish, 1978, when those proto-minifigs and minifigs were introduced, and then everything kind of got readjusted to fit minifig scale. So 1971, 50 years ago, did predate the minifigs, and the scale was still set down here where we had these smaller windows, and this actually fits the 4-wide cars much better. So if you think back to why were 4-wide cars so prevalent in these themes, in these sets, I think that was a pretty close match to some of the buildings that were being constructed, and the building is kind of scaled based on the window and door elements that were around since very early in Lego production. So the Swiss Chalet from Legoland. One of the Minitalia sets was 5-4, the large house Minitalia set. And I think this was maybe something you could consider a flagship from the line, one of the larger sets of the time, 307 pieces. Now if these had prices, and in fact I think one of the Samsonite ones I'm going to look at here in a sec does have a price, we do have to account for inflation. So when you're going through these, maybe looking at some with very low prices, just keep in mind that inflation is going to play a pretty major role. Take a look at that with the Samsonite set here in a minute. Minitalia had the green roof pieces and the red walls in this specific set. They also had other color combos. But this 1x4 fence here in green, probably pretty much exclusive to this theme, if not one or two other sets. Now Minitalia is different enough, I wanted to take a separate look at it. This is the result of searching Lego Minitalia on eBay. Some of the stuff available right now from Norway here are the windows, the 1x4 windows, and these just have that lattice pattern. Now according to the lister, these are prototype, so the blue and yellow windows were probably either released in a few sets or not released, just based on the color. The white windows we did see right here in this set, so we know that white is a released color. And the other thing you can look at is the bricks themselves. Now keep in mind they're the same dimensions as a Lego piece. Everything will work. You can put these in place of a Lego 2x4. Minitalia is still officially Lego, but it has a very different look. So the top of the studs are recessed, like Technic bricks are. The top of the slopes are recessed, and then some of the underside of the slopes have the cross bracing instead of the tube bracing. So if you do come across pieces like this, you might mistake it for a knockoff Lego piece, but Minitalia is official Lego, and it's pretty highly collectible. If you know what you have, you can ask for collectible prices. So some of these window elements probably priced a little high, but might be based on what's been already sold. So you could get at least $5 a piece for most of these complete sets. Looking at adding up a couple hundred pieces, definitely going to be worth a lot of money, or cost you a lot of money depending on what you're looking for. Minitalia pack number 14 is going for 180 now from Italy, so that's cool. Minitalia was a very Italian-centric theme produced by Lego. So just keeping in mind, we're talking about what is now considered vintage. Minitalia did enter that vintage classification last year, and for the next couple of years, some additional Minitalia sets will be going into vintage classification. Another one that I wanted to look at was the antique car. More so this one just for some of the instructions here. We had the step-by-step building introduced, and very easy to follow, very simple, something that you could probably build if you had the parts just based on this picture alone. Hopefully, because that's all they gave the people who bought the set. Interestingly enough, the image here shows yellow rims instead of the red rims. That was probably just a limitation of the color printing. They didn't want to introduce another color just to show the rims, so they did yellow. But a cool little set in the Samsonite brand, 1971. Approximately $20 going used. This was 363-2 antique car kit. Did they say anything else about The set contains enough standard Lego parts to build this car. Easy to build for hours of exciting play. I don't know about hours, but it's a pretty cool car. I like it. Another Samsonite set from 1971 was the 630-2 Diplomat Set. Kind of an interesting parts pack here. Build any of these exciting models or some of your own design. So this would have been just a pack of bricks without instructions. The images here were enough to give you an idea to maybe get started, but I don't think you were supposed to build these specific constructions. It's just that you would be able to build these. It was just kind of a way to advertise the possibilities of what was included in the 630 set. So the thing that caught my eye from this was the vehicle windshield here. They actually left one of the 1x6x3 windows slightly detached to give the angle of the car windshield. So that's interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen official sets leaving something slightly detached like that. But you get some nice curvature in the seat there of the vehicle and some texture with those 1x1 round bricks. And then the character here, kind of an interesting system build. Keeping in mind, Samsonite very heavily producing of the basic 2x4, 2x2, 1x2, some of the early bricks. And of course, at the time, they didn't have much more than your basic bricks, but Minitalia did have those fences. One of the last things in the list from Brickset shows our flags, printed bricks, and fences. So those were starting to make their way in. There's elements of wheels for the cars, the clear bricks for the windshields, doors and windows were all present in 1971. Last one to look at is the Samsonite 1241 piece basic set, Samsonite-3. So no official number here. This was a set with 1,241 pieces, and it retailed for $17. So at the time, that would have given you a value of 1.4 cents a piece. And you're thinking, well, that's incredible. You can't even find that almost secondhand. You can't find that kind of prices now. But remember what I said about inflation. We're going to look at the power of that now using an inflation calculator. So 1971, you purchase an item for however much money. In 2021, it would cost this much money. We have 539% calculated inflation. This is the US inflation calculator. I'll put that link in the description as well. So just to kind of get a benchmark here, I found the price that would be equivalent to roughly $10 today. So you think of a Lego set that's about $10. Some of our small city sets, like the little street sweeper, green and white from last year. If that were to be sold in 1971 and you would backtrack the rate of inflation back down, it would cost $1.56. So, you know, just trying to account for that a little bit and gauge where we're at with this set. When it sold for $17, that is the equivalent of $108.57 today. So now you divide your cents per piece, and this should be just over 1,000 pieces, and yeah, 1,241 pieces. So actually, accounting for inflation, the price per piece of Lego has been very, very steady, even going back 50 years and before. That's why I think it's a pretty good benchmark to use. It's not perfect because pieces vary in size and value, and you know, no two pieces are the same. So there's that variation in there, but once you factor in things like inflation, you can go back 50 years and look at a Lego set, and the price per piece is virtually unchanged. So yeah, once we do account for that kind of going back, I think it's a pretty steady thing. Brickset is done. I think there was a Brickset article about it as well. If I can find the link, I'll put that in at some time. I'll probably do a different video about that down the road. I just think it's an interesting measure of value when you're talking about Lego. It's very handy to do quick calculations, and then you can kind of dive in and do more specific stuff. So yeah, I chose this set because this featured in my horse video a long time ago. This has the brick-built horses up in the front here. So just kind of a little throwback to something I did before on the channel. It's got to be about 2 years ago now. So one of our earlier videos, when I looked at the history of the Lego horse, we do have a little mark on the timeline going back to the brick-built horses in the Samsonite set from 1971, which now passes into the Hall of Vintage Lego. So that's something you can kind of keep in mind now when you're looking at eBay listings or just trying to have discussions about, what does vintage Lego mean? Officially, probably want to look at stuff that's 50 years old or over. So this year, going back to 1971 and before. And these are the sets that will now enter the cohort of vintage Lego. Minifigures will not be considered vintage until 2028. So yeah, it's a technicality. I mean, you can talk about some of the oldest figs being vintage if you want, and it's probably understandable, what you're trying to say. So if you want to be technical about it, you have to go to at least 1971 or before. A lot of these sets, pretty recognizable. I know BrickTsar does a lot of vintage Lego on his channel, so he would be able to kind of give more info on this if you want to know more about vintage Lego. I've got a couple of the older sets, but that's kind of the expert channel on the topic that I'm familiar with at this time. So BrickTsar has completed a lot of the subgroups and sub-runs of Lego sets from this era. And I'd recommend that channel if this is something that interests you a lot. So check out BrickTsar for more vintage stuff like that. And 1971 wraps up our vintage look today. Thanks for watching, Brick System Brothers, guys. We will be back with more Lego content, so we'll see you next time.